Hello there, boys and girls, ladies and gents. Welcome to what I anticipate is going to be a shorter stream than the last one I did for you here on the channel when we did our political compass test on Saturday night, which ran over well over 4 hours. We're here to talk about the German election results because it's admittedly it's a little bit hit and miss which foreign elections I choose to look at here on the channel, but I think that it feels relevant at the moment against the backdrop of us discussing what Europe wants to be doing about Ukraine and increasing rifts between the United States and Europe. It's quite important to see where Germany comes in all of this. So I'm joined here by Tom Williams and Objects of Hate. Hello to both of you. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you. And you, Tom?
Yeah, I'm doing well. No issues with me overall.
Okie dokie,
Thanks for
jolly
having
good.
us on.
No problem. So first things first. Well, first things first. I should bring the results up for the dear viewers to see as well. That's probably a good idea. So we have here the part now. What I kind of like to do when we're doing this sort of stuff, and I know that it's not really possible to make direct comparisons between UK parties and German parties, say, because it's a different system, different playing field, all kinds of different parties. But for the sake of any viewers who perhaps aren't, super aware of what these German parties are, for the sake of argument, I think we want to say that like the CDU stroke CSU is like the Tories, right? They sort of inhabit the same kind of space as them, or would you disagree?
I've been following German politics since 2017 at this stage, so I know what these parties are like and they stand for. Going through them, the CDU are basically like the Conservatives. Also in more ways than one, because they've got their own sort of factions here. Like you've got here listed, you've got CDU, CSU. The reason for that is because the CDU doesn't run in Bavaria, which is a region in southeast Germany, but instead a political party called the Christian Social Union runs in that region and basically wins all the seats there. The CSU basically has an electoral pact with them, and they always work together with each other no matter what, which is why they're called CDU CSU political party. It's a similar relationship between Labour and the Co-op Party. That's basically the best way to describe it. Where they're officially separate political parties, but in reality, they always work with each other and never against each other, so they're included in the same block.
And then to launch off of that one as well, I'm going to stick to the next easiest one, I think. SPD, the outgoing German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, we're going to say that's broadly the equivalent to the Labour Party, right? That's sort of your social democratic left of centre kind of party, right?
Yeah, pretty much. It's basically the Labour Party. In particular, it's Keir Starmer's type of Labour Party, more than Corbyn's Labour Party.
Okay, AFD. I'm tempted to say the most obvious comparison would be Reform. However, I feel that possibly does Reform a slight disservice in a way, because I think that AFD does have more obviously far-right components to it than Reform does.
I would say that it's an unfair comparison to compare Reform and the AFD with each other, because Reform are nowhere near as right-wing or extreme as the AFD is.
Do we want to try and put the AFD, saying that the AFD is more similar to UKIP or the DMP or something in that kind of a ballpark?
I would say at this stage, yeah. If we were having this conversation
UKIP, I'd say, yeah.
I would say if we were having this conversation 4 or 8 years ago, back in 2017 or 2021, I would have said that the Reform AFD comparison is valid. But the AFD have shifted so far to the right at this stage that even other hard right nationalist populist parties in Europe, such as National Rally in France and Brothers of Italy in Italy, which is Giorgia Meloni's party, view them as totally extremist and have kicked them out of the European grouping that they're a part of, which I think is called ID. And
Shall we
now
talk
they're
about
part
which policy that happened over? Because
of,
it's a very specific one.
I think it was to do with worship of, it was to do with glorification of SS figures, if I believe, is what led to the disillusion between the national populists and the AFD.
Oh, just quickly, guys, we've got NA here as well, who'd requested recently that the next time I do a stream here, I put the link in the chat so they can join. I can't remember off the top of my head
Hi,
whether
NA.
or not NA's been here in a stream with us before or not. Maybe NA can let us know. But hello there, NA. Say hello if you're with us.
Hey, cheers. Thanks for
Hey, no problem. Is it your first? Is it your first time on the channel?
Yeah, after so many years, this is the first time.
Oh, fantastic! Well, welcome in that case then.
Oh, welcome.
Anyway,
I realised
yeah,
yeah, I was just going to say, I realised I just cut off the other guys with what they were talking about there, so I'll let you guys finish your point.
So just the SS thing is the AFD, some AFD spokesman said not all SS officers were criminals, and that really set off a firestorm. You can imagine why. But the FD has been in trouble with the National Rally before, amongst other parties, also over the remigration policy, which is really sweeping every right-wing part. So what you could call radical right-wing parties in Europe, they're all now talking about remigration, which is something that was not even on the radar 18 months ago. And you won't even have Reform talking about this, I imagine, before 2030 at the earliest. But yeah.
Well, I think I may be wrong. I think Rupert Lowe possibly has used the phrase remigration already. I feel like I've heard him say that before. I'm not sure. But remigration, from my understanding, is basically just mass deportations by another name, really.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. It seems like it's sort of like a dressed-up new way of going. We're not kicking them out. We're just remigrating them elsewhere.
Yes, it's basically reversing the last 10 years of mass migration or more.
All right then. So if we're saying that the CDU are kind of like the Tories, the SPD are kind of like Labour, the AFD is somewhere a bit further to the right than Reform, shall we say? Maybe in sort of UKIP, BNP type territory. What about the German Greens? Because in Europe, the Greens in Europe are kind of a much more established political force than they are in this country. Whereabouts would they sit then?
They would basically just be more or less similar to the current Green Party, but more right-wing. That's more or less where they are. The German Greens, when compared to the British Greens, well, the English and Welsh Greens, because of the way the two parties are set up, is that the German Greens are a lot more hawkish and a lot more fiscally conservative than the English and Welsh Greens are.
Okie dokie. And what about
sorry, go
on. No, sorry, pardon me. And what about this one? How do you say their name? Die Linke?
Die Linke.
Die Linke, which basically means the left in English. They are basically Corbynites. That's the best way to describe them. Yeah. They're comparable to Jeremy Corbyn and the Gaza independents that are in Parliament. That's the best way to view them.
I'd say to an extent, but they're very much a big tent left party. Like you'll get everything within them. Like there's Trotskyists, there's Marxist Leninists, there's Social Democrats, there's eco-socialists. It's like very much a big tent of the left.
So my question is
true, guys, but I would say that they aren't as big tent as they used to be because BSW existed and split off from them.
That is the exact point I was about to come to. Because if the way that you guys are variously describing Die Linke is to say kind of like Corbynites or very left wing or lots of different elements of the left, what's the difference then between Die Linke and the BSW? Because BSW's left wing as well, aren't they?
Yeah,
BSW or this Bundeswehr Wagner is basically tankies. That
Are they
is
like? Are
more-
they? When you say tankies, what? Just to really specify here, what do we mean? Like what
They're
kind of
basically-
policy differences?
They're very left wing on like economic policy and such, but at the same time, they're quite socially conservative, and they split off from Die Linke because they view Die Linke as being
Woke.
too socially liberal.
So
and-
it's George Galloway's Workers' Party by another
Yeah,
name.
basically,
Yeah.
BSW are like the German equivalent of the Workers' Party. That's
And
essentially what
they're-
they're like.
they're
and-
anti-immigration,
anti-trans,
which is very
pro-Russia
rare
kind
for
of-
a left-wing party.
Oh,
Yeah, that goes back to the social conservatism argument, and
Yeah.
that was the reason they
Yeah.
split off from Die Linke in the first place.
I'll say this.
And
Just
but the thing that has made them the most amount of headlines, rather than just existing and splitting off from Die Linke, is they are very pro-Russia, even more pro-Russia than AfD is. They've called for all the sanctions that have been placed on Russia to be removed. And I think that some members of the party have even said that the Russian annexation of Crimea should be recognized as not illegal and viewed as a legitimate reclamation of territory by Russia. So yeah, they are very, very pro-Russia. They haven't gone as far as to be like everything Putin took after February 2022 is all part of Russia. But they have said that basically everything that Russia took after 2014 is now part of Russia and should be officially recognized as such.
So that's the BSW then, and it's worth noting here because I think that the way that the German system works when they vote is you need to reach a 5% threshold in order to begin getting seats.
Correct.
So
but
obviously
there is like a little bit of a caveat to that. Like if you win basically the equivalent to 3 MP seats that we'd have here, like 3 constituencies, then you get your percentage. So if you got 4.9% and you won 3 MPs, then you get 4.9% of the parliamentary vote as well.
Right. So some of it's
So if you win 3 outright
and-
seats, then you get the proportional as well. Because
Right,
that was
okay.
a lot of the debate with Die Linke was if they didn't reach the 5% threshold, then they could get their proportional through 3 constituency seats they'd be likely to win.
Okay, so the BSW here, it says they're on 4.9, so they've just come very, very shy of.
Yeah, there was
that there.
constant back and forth when the results were being counted, where it's they reached the threshold, then they didn't reach the threshold, then they reached it again, and then they didn't again, and then when the final results came in, they just about missed the threshold in the end.
Quick
and that was
question.
The last time they got 4.9% last time.
I mean, I was going to say, like, oh, how tragic for them. But, you know, given they're Russia apologists, I'm not feeling that bad.
I would say,
question here from, sorry, I'll just say this quickly. A question here from Frank in the chat who says, how did the SSW get a seat then? I was going to come on to this then. So SSW.
I honestly don't know what the SSW is. Like, the only thing that I can see from them is they basically look like what would happen if Walmart was a political party because of the way their logo looks.
It's basically if you're like an ethnic minority, you can get a minority amount of seats. Like some countries have that. You know.
Hang on.
Oh,
So
Danish minority. Okay, gotcha.
It says it represents
right, so this is
Danish and
basically-
Frisian minorities of the. So the idea is then if it's a party specifically representing sort of an ethnic minority of sorts, there is a different way of getting them in.
Right.
Yeah,
so
you
this
get
is
it a lot with
basically
that,
a sort of Schleswig-Holstein party then, because in Schleswig, which is a region in northern Germany that borders Denmark, there's quite a large Danish population there. So I guess that's just an example of ethnic minority representation then.
All right, and the final one that I want to come on to here, and then I will take some of the comments from the chat. The FDP, which also just missed out on some seats on 4.33%. Any idea where these guys are at?
Yeah,
Basically,
Free Democratic
in-
Party.
basically,
Oh, are they the Lib
imagine-
Dems? Are they the Libs?
Well,
No,
what
yeah,
I'd
but
say
very,
is-
very,
they're not
like
Lib Dems.
very free market Lib Dems, like no
Yeah,
controls on the
I would say basically imagine Orange Book Liberal Democrats, or specifically Nick Clegg's Democrats, but even more to the right wing of that and very, very pro free market.
So are,
they
are these
sort of-
guys kind of like the Tory Lib Dem swing voter type?
Yeah, basically, they're an in between Cameronite Conservative and Orange Book Lib Dems. That's the more or less best way to describe them. Extremely fiscally conservative, as in probably the most hardline fiscally conservative party in the entire Bundestag, more than any other one in there. And quite socially liberal, but not as socially liberal as Greens or Die Linke.
Okay. Well, in which case then, guys, I think that we've managed to do a decent rundown of the parties being represented here, at least in trying to say who are they similar to for our own domestic audience here. Before we start getting into the results themselves and what they mean, I want to take a few more comments from the chat. So, Leeball here says, to you, NA, congrats on losing your live stream virginity. Hopefully it's less drunken than my debut.
Thank you.
Any comments to make? What are you drinking?
I'm
No,
not
lovely.
drinking. I don't drink, so I can avoid that conundrum.
Don't worry. Well, nice to have you with us. Leeball also says Euro Greens are a bit like Call Me Dave changing the logo to a tree and riding huskies. Environmental overtures, but austerity fans. And we've read that one from Frank already there as well. All right then. So we've gone through the results here. Well, we've gone through the parties at the very least. Let's take a look at the results. So the first thing that immediately springs to mind here is you've got the CDU/CSU coming out on top with the largest number of seats, and they are represented here by the grey part of this chart here. The AFD on 152 seats, 20%. Now, again, for the benefit of anyone who may not be initiated, one would naturally look at these two parties and go, okay, this is like the Tories. This one is like some kind of far right party. They seem like they're similar enough to one another on paper, and given their vote shares, you'd think that they would make quite good natural coalition partners. But Germany's got a very strict firewall against working with the AfD, don't they?
They
I
do,
think
but
it's
that broke.
I think it's specifically called the Condor Senateur, I think it is.
Cordon
Which-
sanitaire is a French term. It's
yeah, the
Yeah.
French term is the
it's
cordon
Feuerbrand
sanitaire.
in Germany.
It's what, sorry, in Germany?
Feuerbrand.
Feuerbrand.
Brand,
Yeah,
which means firewall.
Yeah, okay, so we'll just call it firewall for the sake
Just
of
call it
English
firewall.
speakers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
basically they have a firewall. All the parties have a firewall against the AfD, which basically is the one rule that all the parties have in the German Bundestag is never go into coalition with the AfD under any circumstance and never work with the AfD under any circumstance. So no cooperation on any parliamentary legislation, no coalitions, no working with them in any way, shape or form. Basically isolate them and leave them to their own devices.
now
That was the assumption in German politics, but that broke down a little bit recently, I think about a month or two ago, when an
January, yeah.
immigration bill was being debated in the Bundestag, and the CDU worked with the AfD on that bill.
That's what I was going to come on to. So they've had that sort of firewall, and obviously the Friedrich Merz is not saying that he will go into coalition with the AfD. The firewall very much stands on those terms. But there was that vote on immigration measures, which the other parties did not vote for, but the AfD did. So it was their support. But in the end, I don't think that measure ultimately passed. Anyway, did it? I think it.
Well, no,
failed.
because
No,
the
it
FD only
didn't
had 10% of the. They didn't have enough seats back then.
Yeah, back then the reason for it failing is simply because they didn't have enough seats in the parliament. The CDU and AfD combined together to get it passed because all the other parties voted against the bill. So it failed as a result of simply parliamentary numbers. But the fact that another party worked with the AFD on something was seen as a really big deal because it basically led to the breakdown of the firewall that had been created towards the AFD ever since they gained parliamentary representation in 2013, I believe.
But where things are looking now, then, I mean, obviously, I think the next few weeks are going to end up being sort of like coalition negotiation talks between Friedrich Merz and. Are we anticipating, in all likelihood, then the SPD without the requirement of the Greens? Is that how it looks like it's headed?
The combined seat total of the CDU and SPD would be 328 seats, and you need a majority of 313 in order to be a form of government. So they would have enough
216.
seats. 216 because it's 50% plus one. Yeah, 216. So they would have a majority if they went into coalition with each other. But it all really depends upon how the negotiations go moving forward, because the only real coalitions that work here are basically SPD and CDU Grand Coalition, or the Kenya Coalition, as it's colloquially known as in Germany, which is basically SPD, CDU, and Greens. But I'm not too sure why the Greens would be added in when they don't need to be, and Friedrich Merz doesn't like the Greens and doesn't want to work with them.
I think Friedrich Merz, in the run-up to the vote, had said that his preference was to only need one coalition partner anyway. So I'd imagine if if it's possible he only has to work with the SPD, that's what he's going to do.
And he's been saying plenty of things today that would repel any AFD alliance. I can tell you that. Yeah, he spent the campaign saying yes, day one we'll close the borders, and now he's saying actually no one around here is talking about closing the border, which also is typical, just typical European. Where I promise you things, and then actually we're going to do something completely different. Well, now I'm in power.
Well, on this theme, Kevin Logan has popped up in the chat. Hi there, Kev, who says, "Do not trust the Liberals; they will betray you." Fortunately for you, Kevin, the Liberals didn't quite make it in this time round.
The Liberals are not even in the Parliament this time, so you can't really go with the be trusted. But to be fair, he does have a point there, because the whole reason this election happened when it did was because the FDP withdrew their support for the coalition and collapsed the government, which is why you had the election.
That's kind of wild then, that they are the instigators of the government collapsing, and then they don't meet the threshold to get any MPs this time round.
That often happens in European politics, though. The party that collapses the government often gets voted out of power, and it's usually a Liberal party. This happens in Holland, Belgium, and other places too.
I think it also happened in Spain when Ciudadanos used to be a relevant party before being so bad in terms of electoral performance that they don't even register in Spanish polling anymore because they're that bad.
My next question then, guys, is I'm assuming, similar to the system in this country, that the German Parliament will have like an official opposition as well as the government. So would the AFD now be the official opposition, given that they are the largest party that won't be in government? Yeah.
Basically, no matter what, they are going to be the opposition to the government because they are the second largest party in the Parliament. So whatever the government type is, the AFD is going to be the opposition to it.
Just a quick thing on the FDP, they actually have dropped out Parliament completely before, back in 2013, and then they came back again. So this might not be the last we see of them.
Yeah, I suspect they'll probably return more than likely because they weren't so thoroughly crushed like Ciudadanos in Spain, where they got like 2% and then never recovered from that. They got 4.3%, which is very low, but it's possible for them to come back in the future. So sadly, I do think that they'll return to the next Bundestag in 2029 or whenever the next election is. So I don't think that'll be the end of them, unfortunately.
All right.
Also, with the BSP, if they'd actually crossed the 5% threshold, then the SPD CDU coalition wouldn't have actually had enough seats.
No.
Yeah,
BSW would have introduced a lot of problems to the coalition.
Yeah, that was the thing that people were debating, because if either BSW or the FDP had crossed the threshold of 5%, then the Grand Coalition would have been impossible, and it would have been a Kenya coalition, as it's colloquially known, or it might have been even more difficult to form a coalition government because of the number of seats being taken away from the parties in opposition.
Yeah. By the way, Kenyan coalition, Jamaica coalition, that's all based on the color, the official color of the parties in Germany. They like to think of national flags. So, national flag Kenya, black, red, and green.
That's pretty cool.
See.
Oh, so our
Jamaica coalition is basically yellow, black, and green,
yeah.
which is FDP, CDU, and Greens.
So the 2010 coalition we had in this country was in fact the Ukrainian coalition, because we had blue and yellow.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's how the Germans would see it.
The only other coalition, in terms of AFD coalitions, the only one I ever heard of was the Botswana coalition, which is basically AFD and CDU working together with each other, but nobody ever really talks about that because it just never happens.
Guys, what I'd like to do to move us on to the next half of the conversation, which is about a changing Germany within a changing Europe within a changing world. Catchy title, I know. Is I want to read a little bit of this article, and then we can get on to discussing what the changing government for Germany is likely to mean for Europe at large. Bear with me while I read a little bit of this then. So Germany's Chancellor in waiting didn't wait for the final results of his country's election on Sunday to herald a new era in Europe, declaring the US indifferent to this continent's fate. Friedrich Merz questioned the future of NATO and demanded Europe boost its own defences quickly. The tone from this close US ally and from Friedrich Merz, who is known to be a passionate Atlanticist, would have been unimaginable even a couple of months ago. It's a seismic shift that may read like hyperbole, but what we are now experiencing in terms of transatlantic relations is unprecedented in the 80 years since the end of World War II. Big European powers have been shocked to the core by the Trump administration, which suggests it could revoke security guarantees to Europe in place since 1945. Quote, I would never have thought that I would have to say something like this in a TV show, but after Donald Trump's remarks last week, it is clear that this government does not care much about the fate of Europe, Friedrich Merz said during a post-election debate on Sunday. My absolute priority will be to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible so that step by step we can really achieve independence from the USA, he added. Merz hinted that the endeavour was so urgent that he was not sure on whether the transatlantic alliance leaders gathering for a summit in June would still be talking about NATO in its current form, or whether we would have to establish an independent European defence capability and much more quickly. This is quite strong stuff from the opening statements here of the soon-to-be Chancellor. It's pretty clear his direction of travel.
I think Merz also said throughout the idea of nuclear sharing agreements between Germany, France, and the UK, where basically he wanted British and French nuclear weapons to basically wanted Germany to be under the British and French nuclear umbrella, is what he said he wanted.
It's amazing already that things are now being thought in the terms of no, because it's always been the American nuclear umbrella. Now it's the British and the Anglo-Franco nuclear umbrella that suddenly we're the ones that can, shield Europe. At least
some people don't seem to know much about British nuclear weapons either. That's the interesting thing, since we make our own warheads, but the missiles are American, and they have a say on launching them. So
that's not entirely true, though, because operational capability, the Royal Navy has talked about that before and basically said that they still have operational capability over the weapons and can use them if they wanted to, with or without permission from the United States.
I mean, I'm gonna imagine, whichever way we want to slice that one, we're pretty quickish going to be moving to a position where it's evidently clear of the independence of our nuclear deterrent from this point. Like whatever involvement the Americans do have at this point, I think they're probably going to try and do away with that sooner rather than later.
that gets complicated. That's A, very, very expensive, and B, complicated because we'd have to get the missiles from somewhere, and that would be France. Now, the French would be delighted, but the UK is now in the process of designing its next ballistic missile launching submarines, the Dreadnought class, if I remember well.
Dreadnoughts.
That's coming along, but they've already agreed with the Americans that they'll be using Trident or whatever's going to replace Trident in the US Navy.
Can we start manufacturing this stuff ourselves?
We could.
That's the question. We could.
We could. I mean, we have a sort of rocket industry, not as good as you'd like it to be, because the UK made the decision in the 60s that it wasn't going to have a big space industry. They didn't. Instead, they went European, like with Ariane. But Ariane Space Group is basically based on the French military rocket program. Otherwise, that wouldn't exist either. The French wanted ballistic missiles, so they developed a ballistic missile program, and that always gives you a commercial space system if you need it.
Yeah, pretty much.
So we'd have to start cooperating with the French, and cooperating with the French under Macron is not a given, I'd say, these days.
See,
to be fair,
I would have.
Macron isn't going to. Well, the couple things with that is Macron has only really got 2 years left, so it isn't that much of a concern. And he's also a lame duck president because his party in the French National Assembly is third behind National Rally and Popular Front.
Indeed.
So he doesn't really have that much authority anymore. But the main thing is Macron seems to be the only leader, more or less in the entire world, but especially in the G7, who actually likes Keir Starmer. So I don't think he'll be unwilling to cooperate with him, especially on defence matters.
Do you remember? It was only a few weeks ago, near the start of the year, in the group chat, we were like going, "Oh, what friends does the UK have? Do we have any friends? What's our situation going to be
Not
like?"
many.
But I feel though that the last week or so really does seem to be shifting some things though, because it's, I mean, at least in the case of Britain and France, and I imagine now that Germany's had their election as well, I think you're going to see Britain, France, and Germany not necessarily speaking with the same voice on everything, obviously, but I think you're going to see a much more united front from these three countries on issues such as Ukraine and Russia and European security at large than we've had in, I mean, I probably can't think of a time, to be honest. I feel that we're shifting into a world now where we are going to be working much, much more closely with the bigger European countries than we did before.
After 9/11, you could say. I mean, in the weeks after 9/11, we were speaking in unison. But
okay, yeah.
That's about the last time.
Yeah, but I suppose, yeah. But I suppose,
but even then, I still kind of remain skeptical of that, largely because I've always been quite skeptical of European politicians keeping their words on a lot of things, especially when it comes to defence matters. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the European army was the big new hit thing that ultimately went absolutely nowhere in the end. And also, the other problem is as well is you've also got some weird issue going on with fisheries, where basically the European Union is saying that if we don't turn over fishing rights to certain waters in the North Sea, then basically they won't press further with defence talks.
Oh yeah, the EU are
they're up to their usual tricks.
Yeah. That's all, up to their usual tricks. Bloody typical, isn't it? To say, "Oh, come on, guys, defence, Russia, fish, come on now, fish first."
And other things too.
Okay, so what I want to now get on to discussing in a way is the situation with Ukraine at the moment. Obviously, there are discussions going on between Trump and Putin, much to the chagrin of other Ukrainian allies. The way that I see this ultimately panning out is probably one of two options, assuming that the talks between Russia and America don't break down. That's another option as well. But the way I ultimately see it going is either there's some kind of a deal put on the table which Ukraine agrees to, assuming there's an infrastructure or an idea in place of how you want to secure Ukraine afterwards, and then probably Europe will have a large part to play in that, or there's a deal put on the table and Ukraine rejects it because there are not enough security guarantees and it's generally quite unfavorable to them in their situation. And at that point, we assume, I guess, that Europe then has to step in to support Ukraine in the war, whatever amount that the US is then pulling back and no longer supporting them. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong or if you think there's other options here, but that kind of seems to be the two ways that this could go.
Well, the second option that I have a question on is, and I'm not sure this would happen, but would we go from, okay, the Americans are delivering weapons directly to Ukrainians, or do the Europeans have to buy the weapons from the Americans and then the Europeans ship them to the Ukrainians? Or do we end up in a situation where, because to put pressure on Ukraine to sign the deal, the Americans say, okay, we're not delivering any weapons anymore?
Okay.
I think that honestly, given the way that the US government is currently at the moment, especially with certain voices in there, they'll probably choose the maximalist option where if Ukraine doesn't agree to whatever deal the US puts on the table, then they'll just cut off any aid to them, cut off weapon shipments to them, and won't give them the option to get them in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I'm basically of the opinion that if Ukraine doesn't agree to any deal that the US agrees to with Russia, then it's basically just a matter of time before what happened in Syria with Assad and HTS happens to the Ukrainian army in Ukraine, because the Ukrainian army is being pushed to the absolute brink at the moment. It's a thoroughly degraded and degrading force that's getting weaker and weaker by the day. The soldiers that are on the front line, there are some units on there who have been fighting non-stop every day with the same men since the war began for 3 years straight, where there's been no rotation of troops in any way, shape, or form, because Ukraine simply cannot replace the existing manpower it has at the moment, because they won't conscript 18 to 24-year-olds, because Ukraine simply doesn't have enough 18 to 24-year-olds moving forward due to extremely low birth rates that happened in the 1990s and onwards. And in addition to that, there's rampant ammunition shortages, supply shortages, vehicle shortages. There's just shortages of basically everything. And an interview that was not supposed to go out with a Ukrainian media organization, basically the head of the army there said that we've got enough strength to last us until the summer, but after the summer, if we don't get any new aid, then things are going to start rapidly breaking down and deteriorating, and the front will become a lot more unstable. So, in my view, it's either Ukraine accepts whatever deal the US gives them, no matter how bad it is, or the front collapses and Russia just pours in through to loads of different areas of Ukraine in the east, similar to what happened in Syria, where the Syrian Arab Army, which was Assad's army, just completely collapsed and the rebel forces just rapidly took over the country in 2 weeks.
Well, that's an optimistic vision for the future. Let me read a comment here and then I'll pose a question. Lee Hallam, by the way, Podge, I'll read yours in a minute as well. Lee Hallam here says, we are deceiving ourselves if we think Europe is united in support of Ukraine. We are the only country with no substantial anti-Ukraine public opinion. Now, when I've been talking about sort of Europe stepping in to support Ukraine, mainly I've been thinking about the UK, France, Germany, Poland, the Baltics. Those are the players that I see that are likely to get involved and step up in some kind of a substantial way. As far as those countries that I've just named are concerned, would we expect the governments of these countries to come to an agreement of sorts about what they'd do to support Ukraine in the event that they did not accept whatever deal Russia and Trump come up with?
They can try, but the problem is that they just don't have the military arsenal to replace what the US has given them. They can provide Ukraine with humanitarian aid and such, that's not an issue, but they simply cannot replace what the US gives them militarily.
And the manufacturing
Because
capabilities aren't there either.
what, sorry?
The manufacturing capabilities for weapons and for ammunitions still haven't ramped up enough yet. All over Europe, they've been trying to do it. That actually is something that a lot of countries have been working on, but we're not there yet. So, no, we can't cover the American capacity.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing as well, is it's not even just giving Ukraine weapons. In many ways, the biggest issue at the moment Ukraine is facing is shortages of ammunition. They really just need more ammunition because they burn through it at such an incredibly rapid pace every single day. And Europe's manufacturing capabilities just are not capable of replacing what Ukraine needs. I mean, I remember back in 2023 when the summer counteroffensive was going on at the time, where Europe tried to ramp up the production of artillery shells to about 700,000 artillery shells every day, and they only managed to reach 300,000 every day, well short below their target. It basically got to a point where the production capability was so bad that Europe had to make deals with South Korea to buy artillery shells in bulk from South Korea in order to give them to Ukraine in the end, because they didn't have the production capability to meet Ukraine's needs. And they're not going to meet that production capability until at least next year. And even then, it might not be enough because Europe's industrial base has been systematically gutted over the past 20, 30 years since the end of the Cold War, especially military production. And that's just time Ukraine doesn't have. Like, this year is a make or break for them. If there is no deal that is accepted and the fighting doesn't stop this year, the front is just going to collapse and break down. So it really is an extremely desperate situation for them. And I think this is part of the reason why Trump has been so maximalist in his demands to the Ukrainians, where he says things like no security guarantees, no more aid, no more any of this, and you give us 50% of your rare earth minerals. And I think the reason he's taken such a maximalistic approach to it is because he knows how dire the situation is for Ukraine, and he's probably been informed of how incredibly dire it is by all his intelligence agencies. And so he basically sees them in a vulnerable and weak position and wants to take advantage of that in order to benefit the US and himself.
Can I bring up a point about these rare earth minerals quickly? Because my understanding of that situation had been that at some time previously, Zelensky had raised that point with Trump, still back when it was a time where Trump seemed a little bit more favorable to Ukraine versus Russia, maybe. But he sort of said, oh, look, when we're rebuilding the country and there was going to be all these business opportunities here, look, America, look at all these rare earth minerals we've got. You can extract some of them. We can do some business together, trying to appeal to Donald Trump's sort of deal making, because that's what everyone says. Oh, he's a businessman. He makes deals, yada, yada, yada. But then, from what I understand, that at the very least, the first version of the agreement that the Americans tried to put in front of Zelensky was basically to say, yeah, we're going to get like 50% of the money from all your rare earth materials in perpetuity. And we're not even offering you any security guarantees for it either. We want this as a thanks payment for the money we've given you.
It wasn't just money. He wanted money, and he wanted the earth resources as well. It was both money and resources, as well as no security guarantees and such. And as I said, I think the reason he's doing that is because, again, he just knows that they're in an incredibly vulnerable and desperate situation, and he's essentially giving them what is the equivalent of an ultimatum, where it's either you accept this deal and you give us basically half of everything you own plus interest, or you don't, and then your army collapses and Russia captures everything up to the east of the Dnieper River. Your choice, essentially, is what he said to the Ukrainians. It's either give us half your stuff and you only lose parts of the Donbass and south eastern Ukraine, where Crimea is, or you lose everything up to the east of the Dnieper River.
Yeah.
Um,
There's another issue, by the way, on the European side. And Tom, by the way, everything we say is echoing via you. I don't know if you've been able to fix that. I think now most European countries that have been shipping stuff to Ukraine are getting near the end of their reserves of stuff that they could ship. That is becoming quite a critical point. I think the French are making slight noises about that, and the Brits. So we've got to be. For the very first time, we've heard the British Army saying to the Ukrainians, "Please don't scatter shoot these weapons. We don't have enough of them." They never said that before. There's we're getting in quite a situation all over Europe on this as well.
I've heard along
the Polish have completely exhausted all of their Soviet era weaponry that they kept in stockpile from when they were a part of the Warsaw Pact. That's all completely gone now, and now they're having to dig in to their weapon reserves that they would use in a real war situation. Britain has basically given away every weapon system that it possibly could give to Ukraine outside of critical essential ones that it would need in a war. And France is also being hit hard with its reserves as well. So that's another problem that's also going on as well, which is why I don't believe Europe simply can just replace what the US gives, because the weapon reserves and stockpiles are getting so incredibly limited that it's getting to a point where you're having to tap into the stuff that you would use in a war rather than just your stockpile and reserves, which is just not good at all, really.
All right, guys. I want to work my way through a few more of the comments we've got here, and then I want to raise an additional point with you and see what you think about it. Lee Hallam here says, we are deceiving ourselves if we think Europe is united in support of Ukraine. We are the only country with no substantial anti-Ukraine public opinion. I read that one before. Then adds, the Poles and Baltics will not move resources from their own border. Germans are hopelessly divided on Ukraine. Neither the left or right in France are supportive, just Macron's failing coalition of old people. We had an army of 58,000 and we had given them all of our weapons reserves to them already. And then adds on the point about the minerals. The idea from Zelensky was if the Yanks had business ventures, they would defend them. From Podge, he says, the Trump deal's terms are worse than the Treaty of Versailles. Also adds the EU and US had to bribe Egypt to give shells to Ukraine instead of Russia. Lee Ball says, Lindsey Graham, the dear old queen, was pushing the rare earths in US media a while ago. Reply to that if you like, and then I'll bring up my point. Go on.
Yeah, the Egypt thing is true. That's another country as well that the EU had to bribe in order to get shells from Egypt to send to Ukraine, because Egypt is another one of those countries that has a very large weapons stockpile that they've built up over the years. Because the Egyptian army is quite unusually strong given the state of the country economy and the fact that it doesn't really have any foreign threats to deal with, but nevertheless it's quite very well built up and has a huge arsenal behind it. So the EU...
And it shifted alliances in the 70s away from Soviet equipment, the Soviets to the US, once they signed a peace deal with Israel. So they have a huge stockpile of weapons that they weren't using because they moved to a different standard. That's also why the Egyptians got tapped on that.
Oh yeah, that was the other reason as well. The Egyptians got a lot of US equipment that they've built up over the years because they signed a peace deal with Israel, and they get a huge amount of foreign aid in return for that peace deal with Israel, largely
$5 billion in military. That $5 billion versus Israel's $3 billion in military sales, guaranteed.
Yep, and that's just military sales. That's not even getting into just general foreign aid either, which gets into the billions. Like, Egypt gets a huge amount of money from the US simply to just be peaceful with Israel, which the Egyptian government obviously does not mind doing.
So what I want to pose to you guys now, and I'm going to aim hopefully to finish the stream in about 10 minutes. I want to try not to go on too long today. In a lot of the news interviews I've been watching recently, I've been watching quite a bit of Times Radio on YouTube, and whenever they get sort of diplomats on to talk, or people who've been part of intelligence services or anything like that, the common thing that a lot of these people seem to be arguing for is to say when the sanctions were placed on Russia following the full-scale invasion, obviously large amounts of financial assets that were overseas were frozen. And the argument that a lot of these guys are making is to say that these assets that have been frozen, it would make very good sense to take these and to use these either to purchase weapons for Ukraine or to give the money to Ukraine or what have you. I believe that so far, the frozen assets in Europe, the interest that was being earned off of those assets, that interest has been used towards efforts like that, but the bulk of this money itself, which I think totals, it's some huge amount. I think we're talking like the tens of billions or something like that.
They've been talking about this for 3 years.
They've been talking about it for 3 years, and the sense that I get is that the reason that there's been resistance towards that is that possibly there's legal questions over doing it. Whether or not it would be deemed to be legal under international law. I think
and it sets an incredible precedent as well.
Oh, for a country to go, hey, we're freezing all your stuff and keeping it. Yeah,
all your private individual stuff as well.
Indeed.
Yeah, that's the reason for it, and the reason why they don't do this is simply just because of the precedent that it sets, where you get into sticky territory with private assets, because a lot of this stuff is stuff that's been seized from oligarchs, who are private individuals rather than government officials, despite how connected they are to the Russian government. And so you get into a whole debate about private property rights, which a lot of these countries don't want to get into. The other thing as well is many of them are worried about reciprocal retaliation by other countries who hold assets that are Western assets from countries like China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia itself, where essentially if these assets are used, then somewhere like China, for example, could very easily go, oh, so you've done this. Well, in response to all of the trade sanctions you put against us, we're going to take all of your assets and spend them on domestic industry like semiconductor manufacturing. And it just escalates into a tit for tat from there, basically, where you get one country who will do retaliation against another and its assets, and it just gets really messy, and it creates a precedent which people don't want to deal with.
Hello there, Mr. Cooper.
Hello, Swiss. I didn't realise we were doing a stream early on the German elections. Otherwise, I would have joined. Especially on the train when you were doing this, probably. But yeah.
Basically, the core problem with it at the end of the day is that very good lawyers, which these oligarchs would absolutely be able to buy, would simply make a very easy legal case that this is just state-sanctioned theft.
So in other words, rich people can get away with whatever they want, basically.
Well, Russian oligarchs can, unfortunately.
And,
so that's
and you
ultimately...
know, not me disagreeing necessarily with the point you've made there, Tom, but I do love the use of the phrase state-sanctioned theft when I do think about Russia literally thieving parts of Ukraine off of Ukraine, which is state-sanctioned theft. I understand what you're saying, though, in terms of a sort of a legal precedent in what countries could do to one another. You do that, and suddenly other people may have recourse to do it themselves. I get that, I do. But I wonder if, if push comes to shove and it looks like a rather desperate situation, Ukraine is fighting on, but they don't have the resources. Would they end up taking it ultimately or not as a final ditch effort? I don't know.
I mean, they could do, but again, I think that it would just be something they wouldn't want to do because of the precedent that it would set in the future that could very easily be used against them. I mean, the whole reason why territorial integrity was so important to the international system was to stop things like the Russian-Ukraine war from happening in the first place. Um, and it's also part of the reason why it's, well, at least was supposed to stop a lot of these types of conflicts from happening in the future. In the future, but it didn't really work in the end.
It's unfortunate for Ukraine. They've got a president that doesn't, a US president that doesn't mind screwing them over.
I mean, Ukraine is just this country which has had very terrible luck over the last decade or two. And it doesn't look like their situation is ever going to be getting better. I mean, I knew deep down that something like this was going to happen. The only thing that's really shocked me about it is how just incredibly blatant and uncaring Trump has been about just screwing Ukraine over. I knew
Screwing
they were going to get
Zelensky over,
screwed.
I think, more than anything
And
else. Remember, Trump got impeached the first time over a deal he tried to make with Zelensky.
yeah, I think that there is
So
a part that is
there's a
motivated part
there's a
of
lot
things.
of there's a lot of bad blood between those two.
Oh,
So
but I would also add to
Yeah.
that, though, and you're absolutely right about the animosity between Trump and Zelensky specifically, though I would say that, screwing Zelensky in this way is very much by proxy screwing Ukraine as well. You can't separate those.
It's
Yeah,
like the
you
most
can't.
petty. It's like the most pettiest kind of screwing you could probably do.
I think, but what I thought he would have done is I thought what he would have done in order to screw Ukraine over is basically do to Ukraine what the European Union did to Bosnia after the Yugoslav wars ended, where they made all of these like promises about how, oh, we'll help your country out, we'll make you rich, we'll make you wealthy, whatever, and instead all they did is just drained them of all their resources and in particular of their labor, where they brought them, where they made agreements with the Bosnian government to reduce visa restrictions and freedom of movement and make it easier for Bosnians to immigrate to European Union countries, which as a result led to a massive brain drain, which has left Bosnia incredibly poor to this very day. That's what I thought Trump was going to do. He would essentially make these empty promises of making Ukraine rich and prosperous. It'd be the best thing ever. It'd be amazing, like that sort of thing. And then what he would do is he'd just brain drain the country and take all of the Ukrainian IT people in via, probably give them like special visas, like a Ukrainian HB1 visa, like something like that. And then Elon Musk would just get a whole bunch of Ukrainian IT people and engineers to go work for Tesla. That's what I thought he would do. I didn't think he would engage in full-blown neo-imperialism where he's like, I'm taking all of your resources, half your resources with interest. And if you don't like it, Russia's going to take everything.
Guys,
Will Russia actually take over fully Ukraine, or will it just get like half? Because the biggest, because if Russia takes all of Ukraine, all of our efforts would have been for nothing, basically. Thanks to Trump.
I don't think they'll take all of Ukraine unless they decide to send troops to Belarus again and then wait for the front to collapse and then just send troops in from the north and then the east. But I think there is a very easy possibility where you could see everything east of the Dnipro River, like all of the Donbass, all of Zaporizhia, and all of Kharkiv fall to Russia. That is something that very well could happen if Ukraine is abandoned by the US.
we are
you mean if they
coming
do
up
this
to
Syria type collapse? Yeah.
we're coming
Yeah.
up to around about the hour mark of streaming here, so I'm going to look to head us towards wrapping up. But what I want to do, though, obviously John Cooper has only just joined us recently, and I know that NA hasn't come in much here. And I noticed, by the way, that it is a thing that when people come on the channel when they haven't been before, it can be quite a difficult experience, especially trying to find a point to jump in when there's so many people talking. So I just want to give a chance to both NA and John Cooper. If either of you guys have anything that you'd like to say about either the German elections or Ukraine, I
Well,
want to throw the floor over to you.
I'll probably go to the German elections since that's basically what I wanted to join for before I saw Tom talking about Ukraine, but I didn't realize it was like near the end of the stream. I suppose the election result was pretty predictable. Granted, I'm glad that the FDP has been eliminated. I think out of the three parties, they're the one that probably screwed the last German government over the most. So I think they got a good cooking too. I was surprisingly surprised by how well the Left Party ended up doing. I thought if they got in, it'd just be barely like last time. So glad that the sort of socially conservative, ritzy left-wing one, that's sort of pro-Russia one party, DW something, got didn't get in. So it's like that kind of kills the whole Blue Labour kind of like, even though I'm not sure they're exactly Blue Labour. Greens, it seemed not too bad, I guess, for them, but they still got punished in a sense. Let's see, the CDU, no surprise they won, I guess. It was probably inevitable. They usually end up being the party of natural government for Germany, if you will. So, but I suppose hopefully they would be a bit more stable, see, with like the SDP Grand Coalition. So I was hoping that maybe be able to help Ukraine a bit, though, from what Tom is saying, which he always has the most depressing news about this stuff, but it doesn't look like it's going to be the case.
I can come into the group chat with a positive vibe about something, and then after 2 minutes, Tom's made me feel incredibly pessimistic and depressed all the time afterwards.
Yeah, it's like Tom is like the bringer of bad news. but yeah. Well, the one thing I will say is concerning is the fact that the AfD, the sort of Nazi, it's a new Nazi-like party for Germany, is in second place. And it looks like they might get in down the line, they might get a chance to govern if they keep up that momentum. But granted, luckily, no of the other parties are still willing to work with them because, well, due to Germany's past. I am hoping perhaps maybe there's something, maybe the Grand Coalition can do at least enough decent stuff that it kills off their momentum, but I'm not entirely sure that's possible with these two parties, but hopefully that works well. And the SDP, pretty much, given the fact that the oldest German party that's currently active right now, they seem to be getting to their worst results in like years, from what I understand from the election results. So they either need to get their game together, otherwise they might be permanently in third-party status, from what I can tell. So yeah, that's basically my thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you very much, John. And NA, if you're still with us, would you like to jump in? I realise. Oh, hello.
Well, there's always the 2032 meteorite, isn't there? No, like, yeah, it'd be interesting to see where it goes because both Scholz and Merz aren't very popular, so it's obviously worrying for the future if more support's going to be deflected towards the AfD. Interesting dynamic that basically, even though Scholz was very unpopular, nobody sort of in the SPD wanted to take up his place because it was basically seen as a poison chalice. So the SPD actually, the actual leadership of it is actually quite left. They still got quite lefty leaders. So whether they'll put up a more left-wing chancellor candidate next time or whether they'll swing to the centre, I don't know. But obviously, they're going to obviously need someone more popular than Scholz.
I mean, I guess what we can say with some degree of certainty is that the German government is obviously going to move to the right relative to where it's been before. Even though you're going to have the SPD there as a component element of this coalition, it's led by the CDU. Merz is obviously quite a bit to the right of where Merkel was. So I think there's going to be that direction of travel at least. Whether or not then their approach to certain issues can do enough or is enough to stem the AfD having capitalization over issues like immigration, for example, I guess remains to be seen. The one other thing I'll say in response to John and Ene's points, though, is that as far as the rise of the AFD goes, I think that the only real concern that people need to have about the AFD getting into power is if this firewall on working with them were to break down, because the only other way they could make it into power is for them to win over 50% of the vote in a proportional system, which I think is a bloody tricky thing to do. So even if they end up at 25%, 30%, 35%, what have you, provided all the other parties at least agree with one another that they still want to keep them out and they'll work together instead, you could get some very fractious and ill-functioning coalitions out of it, but nonetheless, you'd probably still get people trying to keep them out. So I think for now, at least, until or if that firewall breaks, there's not too much of a chance of AFD being in power.
It also has, even before the immigration bill, it had broke down a little bit even before then on a local level. The AFD had, in certain instances, cooperated with CDU locally. While they didn't go into coalitions, they still would work together on certain policies.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Imagine what happens if they the CDU SPD coalition can't get their votes together in Parliament over something that's too unpopular, but the government's pushing, and then the AFD says, "Okay, we're voting for this." What happens to the coalition then?
Well, yeah, I mean that's what I've already got in my mind. Like, obviously there'll probably be some laws that they're going to try and pass in relation to immigration, and I'd imagine the SPD probably having some opposition to some of the measures that the CDU would want to bring in. So do you end up in another situation like that where it's relying off of AFD opposition votes? It could come to that crunch point again, couldn't it?
They could.
They probably would have been able to pass a decent amount if the BSV had got in to do with anti-immigration, because BSV is also anti-immigration. So with them, the AFD and elements of the CDU, they definitely would have been able to pass some immigration related stuff if the BSV had got in as well.
Yeah, I think that's what would have happened. But I think with future with the AFD, it's a real struggle to see how they would ever end up in government unless there's a radical change in German politics. I mean, with the way Germany is at the moment, I could very well see a situation where if the AFD got something like 40 or 45% of the vote, I could very well see what could be called a super coalition form, which is basically every single party in Germany forms a government to keep the AFD out because they despise them that much. But I just don't see a situation where they could ever end up in government simply because of that firewall that exists against them.
Out of curiosity, hasn't there been talks of trying to ban the AFD a few times?
Yes, there has.
There have been talks quite a few times, and they've been investigated quite a few times by a German organization called Constitutional Protection. That's what the name of the organization is. Whether they violate the German constitution in regards to, because in the German constitution, they've got a clause within it which says something along the lines of, if an overtly anti-democratic political party seizes control of the German state and tries to abolish German democracy, then it's the duty of the German state and the German people to overthrow that political party and stop them from destroying and dismantling German democracy. And there's been arguments made by certain lawyers that the AFD breaks that clause because they're anti-democratic. And so, but I don't think they've ever got anywhere with that into actually banning them. So there have been talks of it happening, but I don't think it's particularly likely.
All right, guys. What I want to do, I'm going to read the last few comments, and then I'm going to finish us off for today. So Lee Hallam said, talking of Trump, the main motivation is that Ukraine doesn't matter to him or the US. He wants to focus on China and separate Russia from them. Podge says, you didn't think he'd do imperialism even after all he's been saying about Panama and Greenland. Skullman says, hopefully Link can continue to grow. When it comes down to the SPD, they are neolib puppets. They'll tug the CDU line to benefit their pockets and careers. Also adds Germany is going to look like Italy with a 5-party coalition, lol. And Liebel says this is proving to be a long 10 minutes as usual. Well, we're nearly there. Right, guys.
Apologies, Wes. My appearance of delay, sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, I was just going to say, so guys, any final thoughts before we go?
Yes.
Well, I think.
Would you like to tell me them? There we go.
Yes.
Well, I think for me, I just wanted to sort of address the couple of things about Trump's motivations and the whole imperialism thing. With the imperialism thing, as I said, I knew he would do imperialism because I mentioned before about the brain draining of Ukraine, but I thought it would have been more soft and subtle, similar to what the EU did with Bosnia, where there was a degree of plausible deniability within it. I didn't think he'd be so open and brazen about it as he was. As for the bit about his motivation, yeah, this is something which a lot of China hawks in the US want to do. And honestly, I just think it comes from a place of complete and utter delusion. For a start, Putin's worldview is one in which he views the West as an external and existential threat to Russia's existence. So why would he work with the West ever if that's the worldview that he holds? And the other problem with it as well is that why would Putin completely do a 180 on his foreign policy when he gets rewarded for his foreign policy? That just doesn't make any sense. Like, if he gets rewarded for the things that he does with regards to his foreign policy, then he'll just continue to do it. He's not going to do a 180 on it after he gets rewarded for the things that he does. And the other issue as well is that US sanctions are incredibly sticky. When you get sanctioned by the US, you almost never get the sanctions removed under any circumstances. Look at Iran and North Korea as examples where they've been sanctioned for decades on end with almost no discussion about removing those sanctions, or even Cuba as well, which has also been sanctioned by the US since the 1960s. So Russia knows that these sanctions are probably not going to go anywhere if historical precedent is anything to go by, which gives them even less incentive to break away from China. I think a lot of this is motivated by the fact that US foreign policy makers are just completely clueless about any country east of, well, Washington, D.C. at this point. And just seem to have this bizarre worldview that Russia will turn on China because reasons.
So, in other words, America, rather than instead of basically powering up its allies that it needs, screwing them over to try and get an ally in a country that is never going to be their friend long term.
Well, yeah, pretty much. But that's kind of the way they've been going for the past few decades. So I guess it's in keeping, really, with them.
Oh, they're moving to China containment, basically. But I'll go back to the German election. This is not a good result for Germany because both coalition partners have had their worst result ever in this election, and they're going to be in power. So this is how you fuel the AfD. They'll be able to point out, look, you voted, and you still ended up with those two parties deciding things over you. Nothing. Look, we're going to have another 5 years when nothing much is going to change, unless Merz is really good on energy policy. They really because the German industry is just collapsing because of the price of energy. The loss of Russian gas, of cheap Russian gas, has been an absolute disaster. Plus green policies for that in Germany. So, if they want to save German industry, the CDU now have a chance to do so. But will they do so? That remains to be seen. If this government fails to get Germany out of the hole they're sinking into, AfD is going to grow, and it's going to grow fast. That's what I have to say.
I think it's to reinforce that point as well. I think it's worth noting how badly Germany's economy has been doing since 2019. The German economy is basically in free fall ever since COVID and the Ukraine war. Germany since 2019 has seen only 0.2% growth to its overall economy since then. Even countries like the UK, Italy, and Japan, which are typically seen as economic basket cases, are doing far better than Germany's economy is. And they've also been stuck in recession since 2023, with negative growth consistently pretty much every economic quarter since 2023. And it's only getting worse now, with inflation beginning to return and high interest rates and energy prices also going up as well. So Germany's economy is in a really, really bad state. And until they do something about energy prices and try and resolve their energy situation, the economy in Germany is just going to get worse and worse. And the worse the economy gets, the more the AFD benefits.
So do you think they would try and do like the nuclear energy kind of thing? Because I think that's something more the CDU are pro compared to like the Greens.
I think the benefit that the Greens, I mean not the Greens, the CDU have is that because the FDP and BSW failed to get into the Bundestag, they have the opportunity to just work with the SPD and bypass the Greens, which does give them the flexibility necessary to build nuclear power. But the problem is since the Fukushima nuclear disaster, anti-nuclear sentiment runs incredibly deep within Germany, and there's still an intense paranoia towards nuclear energy. So I honestly don't know. It really could go 50-50. It is, as I said, the only saving grace the CDU have is that the FDP and the BSW party didn't get into the Bundestag, so they don't have to work with the Greens. If they had to work with the Greens, then basically Germany would just be completely screwed and the AFD's rise would be guaranteed.
Right, guys. On that, I'm gonna take it as time for us to finish the stream here. So, what I want to say, by the way, Objects, it's your first appearance here on the channel this year.
This year, yes.
So you're now in contention for a Milky for 2025, and NA, it's your first appearance on the channel ever. And likewise, you are also Mr. Williams and Mr. Cooper. This is both of your second appearance each. I'm actually keeping track for a change. I've got a little.
Okay, fair enough. I'm sorry it was a late one. If I knew you were doing this sooner, I would have joined sooner.
No, I mean, you know, I can hardly blame you. I'm very unpredictable when it comes to popping up and telling people when I'm going to stream. So can't blame you. And there we are. Please remember to like the stream before leaving. Thank you very much. So to you guys who've joined me in the stream here today, and to all of you guys who've contributed in the chat as well, thank you very much. Please do drop the stream a like, and we will see you all again soon. Catch you later on.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.